I am here today with my friend Shawn Smiley. Shawn and I were principals in a large urban school district together I was there for 4.5 years. You were there longer than that.
Yeah, about 17. Yeah.
17 years altogether. And I want to tell you a little bit about Shawn because when the book eventually comes out, you're going to see that he's mentioned several times in the book because of the impact that he had on me personally as a principal.
Stop it.
The interesting thing to me is Shawn is a much younger principal, was a much younger principal than I was. But we kind of hit it off right at the beginning.
Sure.
And I felt like every time I talked with him, I would come away with these great ideas. And then I would think, all right, now can I do some of these things in my school? And probably the one that had the biggest impact, which honestly, I look back at it now, was almost a mistake on my part because I almost didn't do this. But I don't even know where it was that we were talking, but you told me about a book club you'd started. But before we do that, let's talk about you for a minute. Tell me what you've done and why this is of interest.
This morning I slept in, had a big breakfast.
That's a good start.
As far as professionally in education, I got started in education pretty late. I was a middle school teacher for 5 years, and then I decided to get into elementary education just because I had more of a passion for it. Actually, at the beginning, I thought I really wanted to be like a kindergarten or first grade teacher because I really do like little kids.
That's brave. That's very brave.
And then I did a part of a maternity assignment, and I realized that kindergartners and first graders don't understand my level of sarcasm.
Yes.
And how quick I talk and putting things together, and they're like, "Hey, look at this and look at that." I'm like, "No."
While they're pulling on your shirt.
Right.
Yeah.
So then I ran out of a first grade classroom pretty young, and then I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna go with middle school. They kind of get it. They're young enough to still want to learn, and old enough to really understand some abstract things I use and emotions.
And they can get your humor a little better.
Yeah, right. I teach different, Not that it's right or wrong, it's just my way. And then I realized I was getting some things from the elementary schools of kids that really didn't get it in different ways, more specifically math and science, which is what I taught. So I thought, I'm going to be an administrator and I'm going to go change the world and do all kinds of
absolutely
great things for elementary schools, and got into elementary education that way. Did an internship, did a year at as an assistant principal, and then took over a couple schools as principal.
Outstanding. Now, was it on purpose that you decided, you're like looking at test scores or something, you say, oh, my guys can't read. How did that come about?
So, as you know, the district we were from, we were pretty data heavy. And looking at the data and breaking it down, having the opportunity to really understand, because I do enjoy math, I love math, the graphs, the charts, all the things. But what kept popping up was our boys struggled everywhere.
Absolutely, that's right.
Our boys struggled, and it didn't matter race, ethnicity. It didn't matter anything. Our boys were struggling, and that was really the one big common denominator as to really some action needed to be taken more than anything else. And
by that time, we, as a district, we tried all kinds of things.
Sure.
I mean, we had a tremendous literacy framework that was built by the district from the ground up. That was a balanced literacy approach, and it was really good, and it was implemented. I mean, they had done all kinds of training, very intense training. You and I, as principals, had gone through training with some of the big names, Kim Marshall and Doug Reeves and some of these other people that they brought in to show us how to improve schools. And then something happened.
It's cool because how we ran our district, or how the districtors ran, I would say, that we were a part of, collaboration was huge. And I remember being part of a team that we sat with some people from Hartford, Connecticut. They came in and they were talking about their schools and how they don't communicate and they don't share ideas, and it's very competitive. And if they have something going great, they don't share it with anybody else. And we sat there in a committee. It was a 3-day long thing.
Oh, yeah, I do remember that one. Yeah.
And we were sitting there, and by the end of the conversation, it was, well, basically, you guys have Midwestern values, and you want to see each other be successful. I can't take that back and make that a program. So, for you and I having conversations, there's some similar interests socially and personally. I think it was even easier for us to communicate that point. But to be able to talk to your colleagues and have conversations about what are you doing, what's working, what's not, and really be able to shave off some of those rough corners.
And to not be afraid.
Sure.
So that I could say to you, and I remember a conversation you and I had with another principal who was struggling, and the reason that you and I saw some success is that we would feed off of each other.
Sure.
And I think that was so important because I am not much of an ideas person. You're the ideas person.
Well, you're the smart guy.
I'm
an idea guy. You're a smart guy.
But what I'm good at is taking somebody else's idea and developing it. But coming up with that idea to begin with, oh man, it's not going to happen.
So we had the school I was at. We had in our district, for people who don't know, kids that are expelled from school don't just go home. They go to an alternative learning program. And when I got to that specific school, we were only working with some of the kids, and then some other kids were at another school, and other kids at another school. And it was very difficult for us to be on the same page. And that's when I requested the district, send them all to my school so I can at least run it and feel good about it and make sure we're streamlined. Because it's simpler that way, right? So this is kind of... If you have an actual problem and you're a principal, address that problem with an idea, then follow through, which seems simple when you say it. But if you have parameters to follow, that could be a beast, right?
Yeah.
We had a problem with boys reading and being successful, and the literacy, the background knowledge, every subcategory we broke down, our boys were struggling.
Yeah, and the thing that I still remember is that as we started to study the scores and the data, the thing that we found, it wasn't that we weren't giving the reading instruction. We were very intense and very purposeful in reading instruction and the 5 pillars of reading and all of that. And we had that deeply involved in everything that we did that was part of this literacy framework. But when our guys got to 4th and 5th grade, their scores were tanking. And we couldn't figure out why.
It wasn't at all anything to do with our teachers, because honestly, teachers rock.
Great teachers, absolutely.
Teachers are amazing, and some of the greatest joys I have as being a principal is getting into school, and the teachers that stayed for good. We didn't really have a lot of turnover, and because they believed in the culture and the application of what we were doing, but we believed in our teachers too.
That's exactly.
So when you present a program like this to a group of people that they believe in. Because they understand they have to educate everyone to high standards, but they also can only work in small groups part of the day.
Exactly.
And that's by level, not by anything else. This is by the level.
And certainly not by interest.
Sure.
And that's one of the areas that we figured out we were losing our boys.
Right.
Because we're trying to teach them, and this is one of those interesting things, and I know there's a study that talks about this, and I don't know what the study is, but that since the majority of elementary teachers tend to be female, most often when they recommend books to boys to read, they recommend the books that they read when they were little girls. And that doesn't quite work.
Or recommended even by the district.
Right, exactly.
Not just necessarily our district, but what's recommended for kids at that age, at that reading level.
Right.
Not necessarily by interest, like what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's what brought on the section of the library.
All right, so talk about, how did you, was this a purposeful thing where you said, you know what, our boys are not reading, so I'm going to do this.
We're going to do blank. So it was actually, it was a conversation between the building coach that I had at the time about making this happen. And it went as far as, oh boy. So we were going to make a section in the library for boys. And we knew there would be an issue with the girls not having their own section. So we made it not necessarily a competition, but, I was very forthcoming with the classrooms being involved and saying, listen, these are our guys' scores and these are our girls' scores. And I just let them know what they were.
Yeah.
And some people didn't like it. But also, I think you don't know how to grow. You can't ask a kid to be accountable for something if they don't know.
Exactly.
And kids can be accountable. And kids, we look at what kids are doing today. They can solve electronic problems I never even knew was a problem.
Yeah.
So we've got bright kids. We've got bright
robotics and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And then every other week we would present the kids with their scores, and we would see the boys' scores creeping and creeping and creeping. They build confidence. They're doing great things. They have their own section of the library. We dumped a ton of money on books, trucks, cars, zombies, gross stuff. I mean, just
everything.
Everything you could find.
And we did the same thing. And biographies of sports stars. Mm-hmm. We did weapons and warfare, all that military stuff, motorcycle stuff out the wazoo.
Yep.
And we did all, everything. So that, and I think this is probably a good place, and Shawn recognized this, and I did too. Yeah. In working with our librarians, we recognized that boys pick books out differently in the library than girls do.
Very much so.
Typically speaking, a guy is going to go to the same place that he found a book last week.
Right.
And one of two things happen. Either one, he checks out the same book that he had last week. Mm-hmm. That way he doesn't really have to read it. Or he looks at the books right to the right and left of it and picks one out. Yeah. The problem is the Dewey Decimal System was not really written for kids.
No.
But that's what all our libraries use.
Right.
So Shawn and I both had this idea, and I'm guessing about 99.9% of what I did with boys I stole from you. I'm thinking
you got a lot of your own good idea. Don't sell yourselves too short.
So, but I wanted to make sure that every single book a boy pulled, and we made it easy because sometimes we as guys can be a little tough to get through the noggin. Put a big sign over top, boys read.
Yep.
So they would know where it was. They couldn't miss it.
And they didn't have to scramble through the library to find another book like the one they just did.
Yeah.
You're in the library for 27 minutes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We only got like a half an hour at a time. So instead of spending the first 12 minutes looking, 8 minutes checking out, 2 minutes reading, then leave, they could make a beeline to their section. Yep. They pull one out, they check it out, and then they're adding another 15 minutes to their day reading.
And literally every single book, every book there was a book that a guy would want to read. Now, I don't know how you did this, so I'm just going to ask you.
Sure.
How did you pick out the books? Who picked out the books?
We let the boys pick out the books.
Wow.
So
you're even braver than I am.
So what we did is we started once a week. Once a week for the first month. I had boys that were interested in this program because I presented it to every single classroom, 3 through 5. Then we let the second graders come in once we got good at what we were doing, and let them know that we didn't care what you were reading as long as you were reading. And then
bingo, that's a big one right there. That's huge.
We included cereal boxes.
Yeah.
If you're reading the back of the cereal box, you're reading.
That's right.
If you're reading newspaper, comic books are huge.
Yeah. We've kind of dressed up the name and calling them graphic novels because that makes people who are really literary feel better about it. But they're comic books.
Yeah.
And I grew up loving comic books. So
you grew up reading.
I did.
Yeah.
And
even I would say, I'm not much of a reader. I know educators aren't supposed to say that. But when I'm bored, I don't grab a book to sit down to read. So we got an idea. We got a group of guys. We got together. I read books. We had them into separate topics, separate headings, and the boys voted, yes. And we even had a way how we voted.
Yeah, tell us about this, because we took a variation of this back to the boys' book club, but I love how you started that.
So we did, you say yay or nay, and then you had to grunt and slam on the table. I know it's cave-ish. I get it.
But that's okay, because, if
they felt good about it.
And if anybody's ever watched Tim the Toolman Taylor,
yes.
That's kind of the grunt that it came.
Yeah. Boom.
Yeah.
But what was cool is that's how we started the program, by using that method. And then what it turned into is the guys saying, we wanted these books. We bought those books. But the guys start to buy in. They're like, man, this guy gets it. Like, he's listening to us. Because how many adults, if we're thinking about education, how many adults say, hey, I want to know your thoughts. A kid gives us their really most intimate thoughts, and they trust us for just that second. And then we move on to something next, not realizing how much that really meant to them to tell us that. And then we dismissed it. Yeah. It's kind of like the kid they were excited about the art thing. Bring it home while you're making dinner and doing all the things. You're like, oh, that's great, babe. Yeah. They know when you dismiss them. Kids are smart.
So you sectioned a section of the library which had books that were all about guys. I mean, for guys, kind of books that guys like to read. And did you have any parents complain about that? No. I had one parent who said, well, where's the girls section of the library? And my answer was all the rest of the library because girls pick books differently. Yeah. And then, but I also said the reason the sign is up here is to help the guys find it because, we're guys. We need a little help.
We need some help.
So the sign was for that, but I said, girls are welcome to check the books out. Sure. And I had a couple girls that did. Every week they'd go to the boys' read section because that's what they were interested in. It wasn't
off limits.
Yeah, it was, yeah. There was nothing to do. It was just, it was there. And we made it for the ease of our boys. But then you took it a step further and you started this book club thing. Yep. So let's talk about the book club.
So everybody were checking books out and then we come down every other week or so. We started out once a week, then we started moving it out a little bit once the boys got really good at it. They would have to bring the book they were reading. They would share. They would express something that they got from the book. They read from the book. They expressed something they got back. And then we applauded with a couple beats on the table and some grunts.
Absolutely.
And then moved on. So what we did was we had to prove the literature. They had to work on their fluency in front of everyone. They had to work on some retell, how it affected their life personally, even if it was just background knowledge personal or text-to-text work. And then share with us, but it also taught everybody else to be quiet and listen and grow together as a group.
And the cool thing, when you did that, you weren't actually following any particular format that you knew about.
No.
But what's really strange...
Just throwing it together.
Okay, but here's what's cool about that, though. I mean, these are not your father's book reports.
No.
I mean, not at all. And it's actually a concept that Scholastic Book Fairs came out with.
Okay.
And they call it the Book Talk.
Okay.
And... the idea is exactly what you said. Here's the book. Here's who it's written by. Yeah. Here's a section out of the book that really, appealed to me.
Yeah.
And this is why it fits with my life.
Sure.
And that was the cool thing about this whole business of bringing boys together.
Right.
So that was about the time when you mentioned to me, I've got a boys' book club started.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, well, tell me about it. That was about my level of enthusiasm. All right, All right, good. All right, so yeah, tell me about it. And you did. You started talking about you would bring speakers in.
Absolutely.
But the focus was always the books.
Yep. So I had a couple college football players come in and talk. I had a kid from Clemson come in, a lineman. I had a linebacker from the University of Miami come in and talk. I had I had somebody from the community come in. And just talk about the city and the growth and the buildings and things.
Sure.
But once every 3 weeks or so, we would just have a guys' day. So we would take an hour off in the afternoon, which I got more pushback on that necessarily because we were coming out of the classroom. So we strategically put the schedule together to make sure if we were missing boys for 45 minutes that day, it was okay. We would hang trash bags on the wall. I bought 5 dozen eggs and everybody got eggs and they got to throw it at the wall. They thought that was cool. That was a big deal. Or we had pizza and we did guy stuff. We went outside. Yeah. We
did similar things. The one that I will never forget was our first day. After we had heard you talk about this, and I kind of started doing all these things. I thought, number one, I have no idea how many guys are going to come out.
Sure.
So I put out a thing to 4th and 5th grade teachers, and I said, I'm starting a new thing called, it's going to be a boys' book club. I don't have a name for it yet. Eventually, one of my buddies came up with the name for it. He called it BC for Boys.
Okay.
BOYZ. And I said, what is BC? He said, Book Club, dummy. Okay, thanks.
So you needed a sign.
Yeah,
we needed a sign.
Well, there was the sign. So BC for Boys, the number one rule was that they wrote, because we came up with our own rules, the kids did, the boys did, no girls allowed. And then the second rule was, you can talk to your teachers, you can talk to your parents, but you can't tell the girls what you do in book club. Kind of like Fight Club,
Sure. Yeah.
So they loved that idea. So they would
thought
go
it was special.
Because what we would do is we did it for their recess. They skipped recess every other Friday to hang out with this bald guy and talk about books. Well, then they would go into the cafeteria, and the girls would say, "So what'd you do?" "Oh, we're not going to tell you."
We can't tell you. No.
And not one of those boys would break, except for one time. And that was the one time that a mutual friend that we have, 6'8", who's a rapper.
Oh, yeah.
6'8" came in to talk to the boys. He didn't sing or anything, just came to talk to the boys about the books that had influenced him.
Sure.
And the cool thing was that when he did that, then he took off out the side door and never came into the school. Mm-hmm. Somehow, somebody leaked it. And I always worked 4th and 5th grade lunch. And it leaked all the way on one side, and then it spread like wildfire across the whole cafeteria. And a girl from this table way over here on the far right came up to me and said, "You didn't tell us 6'8" was here." And I said, "Hey, I don't know what you're talking about. We just had book club."
Yeah.
But this first day, and this was cool, I'm trying to be the cool Shawn Smiley kind of guy. And so but my thinking was not very clear. I hadn't given this a whole lot of time and attention to work through the details. But I'd sent out a notice to the teachers, and I said, "Let the boys sign up for this because I'm only going to take a few." Mm-hmm. What I didn't tell them was I was planning to take everybody that signed up.
Right.
But the boys felt like, "Oh, this is cool. I get to sign up, and not everybody's going to be a part of this. So this will be a special thing." I took every single boy that signed up for it, every single one. Well, we broadcast it. We talked about it. We put posters all over the school on the first day. Here they came. Well, it's before lunch, and boys are crazy,
they're
hungry.
Tight, right?
And so after I had introduced them to the book concept and how we're going to do book talks and all this kind of stuff. And then I thought, well, and I had a parent who owned a potato chip factory. And she always brought us these big bags of potato chips, fresh, sometimes even hot potato chips. I mean, that's great. That's good stuff.
That's good stuff.
So I had 5 bags of potato chips. What I was not planning on was that I was going to have 100 guys that first day show up. And I had 5 bags of potato
Everybody
chips.
gets 4 chips.
So here's what I did. This is the most bizarre thing. It kind of sounds like it's like 5 loaves and 2 fishes kind of weird thing, you know. But so I said, here's what I'm going to do. I have 5 bags. I want you to make 5 lines. And I pulled the cafeteria tables down. Didn't even wipe them off or anything. You know, I'm just thinking, guys, we can take it.
It's fine.
So I said, here's what I'm going to do. Nobody takes any yet. I said, I'm going to dump the bag out on the table. Everybody take a handful. That's it. Now, 100 guys, 5 bags of chips.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking this is going to work because they can't hold that many chips in their hands. What I didn't think about was the fact that they all had a book with them. So they walk up here like this after the first guy and started dumping, you know. All right, so they're dumping on the books, and they're going back to sit down, and there are chips all over the floor.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, I am so dead. Because there's a phys ed class coming right after this, and the phys ed teacher didn't like me very much. And I thought, I am so busted. So as I'm looking at these chips all over the floor, I said, "Hey guys, you know what a man rule is?" And they said, you know, things that guys do. And I said, all right, let me tell you about the number 1 man rule. If you drop food, and it's only on the floor for 5 seconds, it's still good, you can pick it up and eat it. And they're like, yes! And 100 guys dived for that floor. And I am not making this up. When I got finished, after they were gone, I swept it up. I had a little tiny pile about that big of pieces that were so small they were almost microscopic.
They just didn't see them.
And that was it. And they literally cleaned the floor. But they talked about that forever.
Yeah.
So... But again, the focus was books, but they didn't realize the focus was books.
They were building their own learning community is what they were doing.
Exactly.
And
that's it.
And
it was a culture. You were creating a culture of reading.
Exactly. And the feedback from the teachers were the boys were reading, the boys wanted to share, they wanted to talk out because, you know, we had a mandate where principals had to be in every room
4 times a week
on a very regular basis. So I made a pretty specific effort. I got better at this as I became a little more seasoned administrator to be in every room just about every day.
Yeah.
And then check in on those boys and, you know, take some notes and then look at it before you go in the classroom and check on that kid and talk about their book. I didn't remember that was their book, but the boys didn't know that. So
that's right. That's exactly right.
You can play a little mind game too. You know,
I did the same thing.
We do it all the time. And then they tell each other, kind of like the 6-8 story spreading. As soon as you check in on a few kids on a few grade levels, they tell each other, hey, he's asking you about your book, you better be reading.
Yep, that's exactly
Wouldn't stop reading. Scores went through the roof.
And that was the cool thing to me. At this point, I'd been a principal for 23 years. Mm-hmm. Had never, ever seen anything. This was a phenomenon.
Yeah.
And the cool part, I did bus duty every single day of the world. I was always out by the buses. And that was the first time in all 23 years of being a principal that I ever had boys come running up to me and say, you got to see this book I checked out of the library. It is so cool.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking...
And consciously stop and listen and be excited. Because everyone else in the bus line's also watching.
That's right. And I said, oh, that is so cool. And they said, can I talk about it at book club? And I said, all you got to do is just remind me.
Yep.
Now, I will tell you one story about book club, which was so absolutely cool. We had this one boy who had multiple handicapping conditions.
Sure.
He was in a wheelchair. He would not miss book club for anything.
Love it.
Loved
That's
book
awesome.
fair. But he was scared to talk in front of people. We had been doing this for probably a year and a half before he decided that he was going to present. And he had one of the Wimpy Kid books. Yeah. And I have to admit, I know those books sell like hotcakes, but they're not my favorite kind of books, you know? But the boys love them. So you got to throw that out there. The boys love the Wimpy Kid books. Oh, my goodness. Well, he said, can I do a book talk? And for him just to talk to me was a big step.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I said, absolutely, we're going to put you up first. So everybody's all around in a circle. We sat around the foul line circle, you know, on the basketball court. And whoever was talking would be in the middle. Well, this guy didn't want to be in the middle, but he sat right, you know, on the side there. And everybody was around him. And he's twiddling his hair. And he's looking down his book like this. And... you could just barely hear him. It was so quiet, you could have heard anything drop. One of those little potato chips. And he told his story. It was the first time he'd ever spoken in front of a class.
That's so cool.
And he did it because he was excited because he was reading a book.
And as a principal, how exciting is it that he's doing that, but everybody else listening is so quiet.
Yeah.
And they're so intent, and their eyes are so locked in. Yes.
Yeah, it was terrific.
We had some of our most shy kids come out of their shell, and our most toughest kids learn manners.
Yeah.
And really respect each other. We very rarely ever had a comment or anything like that. And then when a kid speaks out like that, we ask, is this a book you guys want to see? And then they're like, oh yeah. And then I write that book down. We submit the order. I want this book.
Yeah, is this? And I would always yell it. I would say, "Is this the kind of book boys like to read?" And they'd start pounding and yelling and all this kind of stuff. And it was cool. And you know, we brought in the mayor of the city, and the first thing the boys wanted to ask him was, "What in the world does a mayor do all day?" I didn't think his answer was very good because he couldn't really justify that much time. You know, I don't know, but it was great. We had a male music teacher who was starting a drum corps with buckets. And so he brought in 5 buckets, and it was the loudest book club I had ever. Awesome. Oh my word, it rocked. One day, and this was a wild one, I used to ride a Harley, and so I got all dressed up in the riding leathers, and I'm there. I had the Harley inside the gym, had the stereo. As the boys come running in, I'm playing Ozzy Osbourne's Crazy Train. You know, it starts out with All Aboard and they were just nuts. Yeah. And then every boy that presented that day got to sit on the Harley while they did their presentation. Nice. And so, you know, it was just one of those things. I look back in the years, and I think I spent about 25 years as an elementary principal. And that experience was one of the absolute best of my life.
Absolutely.
And I'm bringing you into this conversation, Shawn, because I didn't have this idea. I did not. You did. And I took it a different way than you did.
Sure.
But it worked in our building. And I will tell you, one of the other interviews that I'm going to have on here on this webpage eventually is a guy who was one of my first book club for boys.
Oh, really?
Kids. And he is now in college to become an elementary teacher.
Yeah. Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Because we don't have enough great teachers.
That's right.
We don't have enough teachers. And we don't have enough men teachers.
Yeah.
We just don't. We
don't. The cool thing is, and the reason we're sharing this is because this is not a program you buy. Mm-mm. It's not something you sign on any line. No. All you do is get somebody who's enthusiastic about boys reading.
Just have some energy.
And have some energy and some pizzazz and be willing to do some dumb things.
Sure.
And have a blast with it. And we did.
Have a genuine good time with it.
Yeah.
You started, you passed off to somebody else. That doesn't count. It doesn't count. It just doesn't count.
Yeah.
Those kids want to see their leaders leading.
Yeah.
And they're willing to lead in the classroom as well. Yeah. They're willing to lead each other if you just give them the opportunity.
And something I always remembered about the book club, because we only had about 20-something minutes, 25 minutes by the time they got in there.
That was the hard part, yeah.
And so anytime I would bring a speaker in, I would say, look, I know you've got a lot of great things to talk about. You get 5 minutes, buddy. That's it. You get 5 minutes. And I'm timing you. I'm watching the clock. Because when that 5 minutes is up, they're going to have a couple minutes to ask you questions. Then they're going to talk. They're going to talk about the books that they are reading.
Sure.
And they didn't even have to have finished the book in ours. They just had to be reading it.
Just got to be wherever you're at in the book. Wherever you're at in the book. Don't have to finish.
So you bring a book, you talk about a book. And that's what drove it. And it was just a cool thing.
Yeah.
So, buddy, I want to say to you, thank you.
Well, I appreciate you for being such a good collaborative partner. I mean it. I really do. We had a lot of good things going.
And we've presented together. We've had fun with that.
Yep.
But the biggest thing is a whole school developed a culture of reading. The next year, our assistant principal in my building happened to be a female. She started a girls' book club. I have to tell you, it was way different. Now, the girls all wore their pink, they got pink camouflage shirts.
Oh, gosh.
They all wore their pink camouflage shirts. They all brought their book, and they sat there and read. And I'm thinking, boys' book club was the boys were completely, it's
just different. Not good or bad, just different.
It's like a bunch of fireflies in a jar. They're just all over, all kinds of energy.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was great.
And we did a lot of good. We did a lot of good. We did a lot of good stuff.
And with that, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I know Shawn and I have. We don't talk about this stuff enough.
We don't. We really don't.
Sometimes it's easy as a school leader to focus on the things that you don't want to focus on. Yeah. Both of us, realistically, were very good at working with schools and giving teachers the power to make improvements and to build a strong collaborative school. We both did that. But the thing that we're most proud of is we got boys reading.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing that stays with me.
That weren't reading before.
Yeah.
And had no interest.
None whatsoever. And reading became the big focus. Yeah. So that's it. And thank you very much for paying attention. I hope you watched it. And we would love to hear your comments.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.